Hi everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Uh, Welcome to Ads in the City, another monthly webinar that we are very excited to have in the right very middle of July. In some places like Italy, it's already desert island already, but I hear that it's quite chilly where Egle is, so I'm very jealous. Um, So I pass the floor first to Tanya, my wonderful co-host, and thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you for this introduction, Julia, and thanks everyone who joined us today. It is a pleasure to have you here today. So let me briefly guide you through what we are going to talk about today, and let me also introduce Egle properly. So today we are having Egle Markeviciute. I hope I pronounced properly. She is the head of digital policy at Consumer Choice Center. And previously, Egle also worked as a deputy minister at the Lithuanian Ministry of Economy and Innovation. So as together with Julia and B&K and Ads in the City, we are covering all things that are connected to the communications, all things that are connected to strategic communications. And of course, we are touching base on politics. Today, I think it is a very proper way to speak about the topic that is also very close to my heart. And what I do on the daily basis is to speak about innovations and also to speak about digitalization, all things economy. And of course, we will talk about the communication aspect because let's agree, communication is key. So let's start it.
Thank you for having me here. First of all, we do have a pretty tropical summer in Lithuania where we have rain every afternoon, but the temperature is very comfortable, 20, 22, 25 degrees. Very happy to be here and happy to see some familiar faces among the listeners.
Yes, Egle, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our venture with Tanya. It's such a pleasure to reconnect with you and to discuss all things communications and political communications in Central Eastern Europe. What we've been doing before in two of these webinars, we've been looking into the political communications, PR, public affairs through the prism of European affairs. Partially, we were looking at Brussels, but I think it's also really important for people to understand what's going on in the rest of Europe. Thank you. How the political communication specialists can do their work in different European member states. Tanya and I are originally from Ukraine, so I think also Ukrainian style of doing public affairs is very different from what you have in Lithuania, but also different from Brussels. And since you've been partially covering Brussels as well, and through your previous role in the Lithuanian government, we thought it would be really interesting to dive deep into all of the differences and nuances and details of political communications in all these different places. And Tanya's expertise in Poland and my expertise in Italy might also be drastically different. Like, for example, right now, what I'm seeing in Brussels in July, August, same as in Italy, it's ghost towns. We were working on one of the cases in the commission. In June, I got the reply, can we please continue after holidays in September? And I'm understanding also that in places like Eastern Europe and Central Europe, August and July are normal business as usual months. So this is a small example, but it's also a big difference for people who are from third countries to understand how to engage with policymakers and how to do good advocacy campaigns. So I'm very excited to speak to you today.
Same on my side. So I would suggest to actually start. And Egle, we would really appreciate if we start from you sharing some of your expertise and some of your previous experience. So the first question would be, if you have to look back at your time when you were still working as Deputy Minister of Economy and Innovation, what would be and what were the key levers that you pulled to accelerate Lithuania's digital transformation? So maybe there were some game changers, there were some decisions that you had to make, or what would be ideal is that maybe you could share some success cases with us.
Great question. For the record, I left the government now almost 2 years ago. I joined the government, in my opinion, way too young. I was 32 and I was a deputy minister responsible for both digital and innovation policies. And we had very ambitious tasks for us. First of all, institutional reform, merging business support, innovation promotion, and expert agencies under one roof. We followed the Business Finland experience, and it does sound very simple on paper. However, when you start dealing with both people who are ready to change and those who are not, and when you have to agree on a lot of things with different ministries, it's a very, very difficult task. At times, it seems, as a young politician, the only option I had was war of attrition, so to say, tire people out and continue and be more perseverant than the other ones. And another big reform that was in my portfolio was increasing Lithuania's digital resilience in terms of data storage and management. Until our government came into power, Lithuania heavily relied on state-owned on-premise data centers, which is very vulnerable in itself. And we have been waiting to implement this reform, and the previous governments were trying to do that. But when the war in Ukraine started, things started moving, and we were actually able to do that. And I was very happy to see that the current government is actually continuing our work, because it's not only the legislation you need to agree and adopt, it's also data classification, a lot of preparatory work that needs to be done, and the current government is continuing that. But, I have to be honest, I don't necessarily respect people who overemphasize their own role. I was very much dependent on the team, the political team, the government, support from coalition, support from public sector, the bureaucracy, if you will. They dislike using this term in public sector, but it is the way it is. So I have to give a lot of credit for people who were together with me. But as a person who was still relatively young and hasn't been in government role or office before, I didn't have any limitations in my head. And when I was about to leave the ministry, some of my colleagues from other ministries told me that we thought you're crazy, because when you presented all these reforms and ideas, we knew that it's very hard to do. But I guess my relative lack of experience in active politics has helped me, because I didn't see the limitations. I was trying to execute them in the best way possible, persevere, and move forward. So that's my short story.
I really love that. I think that sometimes indeed not having enough of the, maybe not experience, because I do not want to sound it in any bad way, but not knowing the scale of the potential transformation that you can do professionally actually brings this kind of breach when you have no limits and you just dive into it. And I really love this approach. But speaking about the digitalization, what do you think helped Lithuania to leap ahead in digitalization? And taking into account the reforms that you witnessed or those that you sparked up, what challenges still remain, and what, in your opinion, can still be done better?
I think one of the reasons Lithuania is relatively successful in various digitalization initiatives and overall policy is that we had a big number of people who were not afraid of planting trees in whose shadows they knew they would not able to sit at. So we had a pretty ambitious people since the 90s. We had a clean slate after regaining our independence in 1990. We didn't have legacy systems, the ones that Western European countries sometimes have. So we were starting from blank paper, tabula rasa, and with the ambitious involvement of all government sectors, with seeing digitalization as part of public sector's reform, not a separate initiative that just copies, the public services and public administration initiatives that have already been there. There were really strong foundations created. And since Lithuania had to do a lot of things in terms of public administration's transformation, in terms of fighting the corruption, and all these things that many ex-Soviet states have to deal with, this has created a relatively agile and ambitious culture, which laid foundations that we all work for now. My friend Luka Silvas from Estonia has actually written a good paper for Friedrich Naumann Foundation on the success of the Baltic states in digitalization. And obviously, the clean slate, the opportunity to start from scratch, no external limitations for policy or the instruments have been really helpful. But at the same time, at least in Lithuania, we also have a very ambitious business culture. As a country of 2.9 million, 4 million Lithuanians are across the world. If we look at it that way, but it's still a very small culture, and our businesses are punching above their weight. They have developed pretty good innovative solutions for the public sector that have been adopted by the public sector. Of course, we still have a lot of problems. I haven't seen a single country that doesn't have problems with their e-health, for example. We do have problems there as well, but we're working to solve them. So there are many reasons, but if we had to compare Lithuania or Eastern European countries in general, I think the clean slate principle or argument was the first stepping stone. Active business culture was another one. Third, everything was happening at the same time, transforming public administration, fighting corruption, creating the modern state from scratch, seeing digital transformation and digital tools as an integral part of it. So all of these things mattered. Obviously, we cannot disregard the influence of the European Union, the funds, the support that has been there. But it's a two-sided medal. When you don't have money, you have to be very innovative and focus on the main targets. When you have a lot of money, there are a lot of people who want to do a lot of things, and public procurement, the implementation of projects sometimes stall. But I will stop my rant here.
But this is so amazing. I feel like, obviously, Baltic states have started earlier and they had more room in a way to experiment. In Ukraine, our government was quite retarded up until recently. And I'm really excited to see that also in Ukraine, in the Ministry of Digital Transformations, it's mostly young people who are working there. It's young people who are driving innovation, and they were given freedom to do that. And also, so Tanya and I were in Lviv 2 weeks ago for the Ukrainian Students for Freedom conference together with SFL. And Misha Lavrovsky was saying the same thing about also military technology, about the drones, what Ukraine has sort of developed, given the circumstances it had, US started developing 2 years later. So in many ways, Ukraine is way more advanced with the innovation when it comes to military, hopefully one day with tech as well. In many ways it has. Because Ukraine was given, there is first of all the room to do that, and there is the freedom for young people to be able to do that and experiment, and nobody is really getting in your way, while it feels like in the Western Europe, everything is so traditionalized and everything is so, of course there is some innovation happening, but in most cases it's more following the lead from the top. Why do you think this is happening?
I mean, in a way, we can see parallels with Ukraine now and the Baltic states in the past. We have to acknowledge the fact that the whole European culture and European Union in general is sometimes hostage to our own legal systems. We have a codified continental legal system. We have to write down everything to the scratch, agree with many stakeholders, many different political fractions, parties within the government's coalitions, etc. So laying out the framework in a law-abiding state takes time, usually way too much time. When the framework, whatever it is, registries, European-wide digital policy, legislative acts, whatever, by the time they're adopted, they are already outdated. And the journey is only beginning then, because the implementation matters a lot. And it's, public institutions' readiness and the agility that matters. Ukraine is not constrained with many things that many European countries are constrained with at the moment. Of course, Ukraine is on their path to the European Union, and they have to align and harmonize a lot of their legislative frameworks with the European Union ones, and the freedom to act will be narrowing as the time goes by. But at the moment, they have the luxury of being fast, agile. The startup community, the IT community is absolutely great in Ukraine, very ambitious. And now that you have the situation going on, there are no excuses to stay and discuss things for too long of a time. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. There are many other things that the European or Western European countries have done, in my opinion, incorrectly. It's a tradition. For example, centralized registries. A lot of Western or Southwestern, if you will, countries do not have centralized registries. A lot of systems, a lot of ministries, a lot of different municipalities are doing their own thing. And obviously, if you have a federalized state, you cannot do the same things that you can do in countries that do not have the same system. But there's certainly room for improvement. Once you centralize your action, once you centralize the political decision making, when you're streamlining the initiatives, a lot of good things can happen. Germany has actually decided to create, the new government has created a new ministry for digitalization. They took some functions from Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Transport and Comms. The current minister has a lot of experience in business. And they have a lot of ambition in streamlining their digital policy and implementation of digital policy. And to be honest, even from Lithuanian businesses that work across Europe, I've already heard positive comments about German ministries and things, data-related, access to data-related things that they're doing. So once you remove the obstacles of having to agree on things between thousands of ministries, things can start moving to the practical level. So kudos to Germany. And if Germany is able to accelerate with their political ambition, it will probably be a good example for other bigger countries where these things are usually taking much slower and are less agile.
Yes, I agree with you. And also, I think that ideally speaking, of course, there should be like very step-by-step developed timeframes, legislative frames that will define the whole scale of transformations, because it is also very important. And if there is a proper legal basis, it is easier to operate with concepts and build the processes. However, again, coming back to Ukraine, I do not think that Ukraine had enough of time to develop that, especially with developing more public services, also doing the digitalizations and introducing new apps or new features on apps. But at the same time, when I'm thinking about that, maybe it was a catalyzer, and it was not despite, but on the contrary, in spite. But coming back to your experience, so now that you are at Consumers Choice Center, you basically shifted from policy making to advocacy. So how much of the difference you see with this your new job, and also coming from the policymaking background, is there something that you wish that advocates already understood about how digital policy is made inside the ministries, or even if to go on a higher scale in European institutions?
I guess I'll start with a cliche. Was it Otto von Bismarck who said that laws are like sausages? You don't really want to see how they're made. So the policy-making process is complicated both on a national level and on a European level. On a European level, it's complications on steroids to a lot of stakeholders, a lot of things to take into account, and so on. The biggest difference for me probably was a cultural one. I guess a lot of Central Eastern European, Eastern European, and even Northern cultures are very direct, assertive. We've always been living next to bad neighbors in cold climates, so directness has been appreciated as a quality. Whereas in Brussels and in the European Union in general, there are other cultures that are more nuanced, more in between the lines, more elegant, if you will. So the communication from a digital policy advocate perspective has to be tailored, and each subject that you're talking about and each object that you're talking to has to be presented a different message. So perhaps for me, as a Lithuanian who comes from a pretty direct culture, where confrontation is not a problem, it's not seen as something absolutely terrible. We love to discuss. You should have seen some of the discussions we had within the government. This nuanced, in between the lines, a long process is very different. But at the same time, the problems that I see with Central Eastern Europe, digital policy-wise, for example, is a lack of interest and knowledge among industry on what's actually happening in Brussels. I have had Lithuanians ask me, so if we go to Brussels and meet these MEPs or representatives of one or another institution, what can we expect? As an outcome. And sometimes I don't know what to answer, because if you're going in advance, not, advocating for a very specific change, you have to know that things are moving much slower than they are in Lithuania. You have to be absolutely patient and invest time and effort in being heard and repeat the same message over and over again. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but these are my general impressions on what are the biggest differences from my previous experience.
I feel like I can relate so much to what you're saying, I mean, first of all, on like the style of communication, of course, coming only from the advocacy or, public affairs point of view, it's like you're asking for the meeting and your answer is, I'm sorry, MEP X is unavailable because there's too many things on his schedule. Or like the schedule is already full, even if you're asking for a meeting months ahead. Translates, they don't want to meet, but you don't know why, right? So it's very difficult to understand if it's really the timing or they just don't want to do it, or they're out of country, or maybe the assistants haven't discussed with their bosses. It could be so many reasons, but they don't give any, and then you are lost with like we don't have any way to move forward. While maybe in Eastern Europe you would have like a specific answer. I'm sorry, this is not related to his field of work, or the schedule is really busy, maybe you can do like another week or so. So having that clarity would have helped. And I feel like a lot of young people who are entering the industry, they don't really understand all of these tricks, which is like the hidden unspoken language among policymakers and or their staffs and teams. And then I also can understand why some of the companies don't want to engage with the with Brussels and the stakeholders in Brussels, exactly for the reason that, first of all, they might not be knowledgeable enough on what the outcomes could be of that engagement. And sometimes the outcomes cannot really be traced very quickly. But then at the same time, I would see in countries that are closer to Brussels, they would actually want to engage even if they don't need to, which is also funny because then you just like overcrowd policymakers with requests, and then they cannot focus on what they actually have to focus on.
Very, very, very good insights. I've, just looking back at my experience, the most honest answers from MEPs, for example, that I had were from Eastern European. I'm sorry for those who consider themselves to be Central Eastern European MEPs who would just say, no, I don't like the subject. I'm absolutely against it, etc. I respect that. It saves our time and no bad blood there. Yeah. And even recently, if we look at the recent discussion with the startups and scale-up strategy or the 28th regime, a lot of startups have submitted their requests for the European Commission, and the European Parliament came out with their own proposal suggestions, and everyone's absolutely terrified at the result because it drifts away from the original idea. And startup, scale up people who are used to doing things fast and move and break things, if you will. That's how Brussels works. You will have to invest a lot of time, a lot of effort, re-emphasize and repeat the same message over and over again, and not be afraid of being confrontational about the subject or about the ideas. I don't, to be honest, I don't respect the memes about, bottle caps and discussing that European innovation is in the trash bin, comparing ourselves to other countries. That's very outdated in my personal opinion. But when it comes to ideas, you can and you probably should be open and point at things that are wrong in your opinion.
I would agree with that. And also, I would say that from my personal experience, I also got the most direct responses, even if they were negative, from MEPs coming from Eastern Europe. And I was thinking where this kind of difference of tones is coming from. And I think that it also comes from the need, because indeed I spot that lots of advocates from Eastern Europe, myself included, tend to be much more direct. And I think that partially it comes from the kind of urgency, because indeed having bad neighbors in several generations, I assume it kind of leaves the collective memory. And whether it comes to the issues like wars, or maybe it can be reforms, or even if we're speaking about such subject as digital rights, this directness usually comes from lived through experience. And in case if the progress is very hard one, you just do not have the luxury of the back language. But then I was thinking whether that can be productive, or whether you need to adjust to the tone of voice of the institutions that you are working with. And I think that, of course, you need to understand how to work in this field, you need to understand the stakeholders. But at the same time, if you combine this Eastern European directness with Brussels diplomacy, I think that you get a more compelling and more strategic kind of advocacy.
Yes, also because from understanding why they don't want to engage with you, or just having more honest and transparent feedback, you can learn more. You can learn what are the arguments you need to prepare next time, or maybe how to change your approach. Because otherwise, if you only keep reaching out to people and you get like the same templated answer, you don't become better. So I think, if there is any kind of current or future members of policymaking world, then it would help us also to communicate back to our clients and see, maybe we need to change this and that.
Well, from my personal experience, we also have to understand that people that work at the parliament, the commission, and other institutions are people too. Sometimes they have very little power of actually changing things that have already been decided. Right? We are discussing a lot of different initiatives right now, and sometimes people are absolutely surprised that the initiatives that have very little to do with their own vision have been included in the discussion. For example, with startups and scale-up strategy, one of the things that were criticized by the startup communities, including action on killer acquisitions within the startup and scale-up strategy. But this has been written in the European Commission's program, in the Ursula von der Leyen's political guidelines, before the commission and the college was approved. So we have to recognize that sometimes people we're talking to do not necessarily have the power or the means to change it. But nevertheless, it's important to recognize who are you working for. If you're working for a new or a small organization versus a big legacy organization, the actions and the style has to be very different. If you're a newbie, if you're just going into market, I would say that every nice PDF, every letter, every poll, every nice article, not pushing anyone's buttons, has already been written by traditional old organizations that have been around for a while. So if you're doing the same, you don't really have your own edge, and you're not bringing anything new to the table. And then we have two outcomes. Either you double down on the expertise and you're providing people with knowledge that they either don't have time to engage with, or provide arguments from your own experience in whatever area you've worked before, or then present things in a completely different, original, innovative way.
Yeah, I think also you're so right that there should be room to evolve, right? We cannot imagine the institutions to forever be the same. And I think maybe in this sense, also Ukraine or Central Eastern European countries, or also Balkan countries and countries from the enlargement program can help and push. You don't evolve on your own, you evolve with all of these external pressures on you. And I think also kind of Trump in a way giving up on Europe helped Europe to sit down and think, okay, it's time for us to flourish, it's time for us to invest in our startups, to think how can we be more competitive, how we don't lose talent to the US or to the Middle East, because Middle East is also, and China, both of them are hunting for the European talent, because a lot of talent actually is coming from Europe and just going in all of these directions.
I agree, but I think one of the biggest flaws that both us as Easterners and sometimes Northerners share is that we have good ideas. We are critical of the ideas that are very foreign to us, but we do not have the perseverance and we don't invest enough time and present actual compelling points following the either policy-making process or the drafting of the ideas for the agendas in advance. So it's on us to an extent as well. You can dislike some of the legacy organizations or industry players in Western or Southwestern Europe, but they're actually doing a great job. They're investing, they're not rushing anywhere, they're preparing in advance, they're planting the seeds like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago and longer, and they're working towards it. At the end of the day, they are successful.
Can you give us some examples?
I don't want to name any specific organizations, but looking at the digital policy, some of the ideas within the Digital Networks Act, for example, some of the ideas regarding easier telecom mergers and all other things, buy European first principle within public procurement directives updates incoming. All of these ideas have been present in Western Europe and some of Western European industry associations for a long time, and they have been preparing the ground for a long time. So they're actually very effective, and we have to learn from them.
Amazing. No, this is so amazing and insightful. I finished reading the book on Huawei with like a very, very detailed pretty much history of the company from its founder when he was young and up to present day. And then the moment I finished it and I realized how dangerous Huawei's networks are, and then I see the news that Spain actually awards a contract to Huawei, and following the news from some weeks ago when Spain was refusing also to raise its defense budget. It got me really thinking about the future of the country. So perhaps some of the advocacy is needed in that way. But at the same time, I'm realizing that countries such as UK, such as US, have been fighting for so much longer, and they have realized the dangers of China for so much longer.
I mean, they do have their national-based industry that they can rely on. For Europe, until now, it's either one or another. I am completely with you regarding minimizing the influence of high-risk vendors in our critical infrastructure and other things. I have some family members who live in Spain. There are other things that they are critical about. At the end of the day, it's sensitive information that they choose to store and manage with Huawei, but it's 12 mil euro contract. Let's look at our 5G infrastructure. Over 32% of European telco infrastructure still relies on high-risk vendors. Not naming any specific names, but we probably both know both. One starts with H and the other starts with Z. That are still very much present in Europe, and we have a little bit of hypocrisy going on, because on one hand, many Europeans are looking ways how to empower European tech industry players and minimize the influence of American tech. But when it comes to 5G infrastructure, I've heard a lot of member state representatives saying, oh, it's just too expensive. There are alternatives. There's Ericsson, there's Nokia. There are European players that we can rely on, and more should be done to empower them. But we'll see. Perhaps things will be changing soon.
Hopefully.
No, that's definitely rising concern, and it is not just the cybersecurity issue, but I think it is overall the kind of geopolitical vulnerability that Europe is facing. But then with the limitations of impact of the tech sector from China, from the US, the question is how many regulation does the EU impose on that, even with the Digital Services Act and AI Act. They also have their own flaws, and also even remember in my recent discussion that I had in Brussels on the AI regulations, I see that there are, I won't write right now on the numbers, but it was around 200 of different digital acts that were signed in the US only in 2025 across various states. And basically it all was aimed on the supremacy of the US in the development of AI, of the development of new technologies, and basically winning the technical competition over the globe. And the same comes from China, even if it is being covered from the absolutely different political angle. And then when you are talking to stakeholders in the EU, then we're talking about regulations and danger, but then what is the competitive advantage? So Egle, what's your take on that?
Oh, the AI Act, everything that can be said has already probably been said about the AI Act. One of the dangers, like looking at the future with tech regulations in general, we already know that once the regulation is adopted, usually it's outdated because the technology moves faster than the legislative process. But I have heard some ideas from former policymakers in Brussels that the new regulations would need to have a hack clause within them so that the EU or the national governments could adjust the adopted text to fit the present needs or the dangers or the challenges that the technology creates. This is a very dangerous precedent, in my opinion, which is not necessarily adding to regulatory certainty for innovators, both European and non-European. To an extent, we do see a model of that with GPAI Code of Practice. The European Commission, the AI Board, the AI Office has been working on it for a long time. The deadlines for new drafts have been pushed further and further. In recent weeks, we saw a new text presented. I'm not sure whether the AI Board has approved it or nodded to it or not. But the implementation part comes very soon, and summarizing it, it's dangerous to have clauses within the next or new tech regulations that would help to completely change the structure and the framework that has been agreed on politically. Even now, we have a lot of annexes, we have a lot of loopholes that allow changes to be made without political approval. And even though we trust the Commission, we trust a lot of experts that work there, as a democratic union, we do need to adhere to principles of political approval, democracy, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure whether I have to say anything else about the AI Act. It has been adopted, it's there. The implementation part is the most difficult one. Everybody knows that. I cannot repeat it again. We've seen the AI continent plan. We will have an AI service desk that is supposed to help people to comply with. But when talking to startup scale-ups all across Europe, I still see a lot of uncertainty in their statements. And when you look at the whole picture of the all the tech regulations that we have, the picture is very complicated. And I guess the lawyers benefit the most from it at the moment. For innovators, it's not exactly clear, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Egle. And how do you think, how with all the rise in technology, because I also fully agree that technology is moving much faster than the legislative aspects, but also I see an interesting trend because there is also a shift of generations, and basically the generation that was raised online starts to enter both policy making and advocacy and activism. So, with that being said, how would you see the evolvement of digital rights and also innovations over the next decade?
Digital rights as in what?
Digital rights as of digitalization and regulations.
I mean, God knows what new innovations and technologies are coming our way. The European Union has already adopted a pretty stable and strict framework when it comes to digital policy and attention span and involvement of people in these affairs. I do think that we have a very short attention span. All these recent generations, the millennials, Gen Z, whatever the next letter is, Gen A or what is that? We have a very short attention span, so policy communication will have to adhere to it. But at the same time, people have to be a little bit more attentive to detail and be less trusting in the communication that is online. It doesn't matter which side it is coming from. Even now, I see a lot of, I wouldn't call it disinformation, but I would certainly say it's not full information that is being presented even in some of legacy media outlets. Let's look at the AI Act or GDPR. There will be some cosmetic changes in terms of reporting requirements. Perhaps, with GDPR, probably reporting requirements and some simplification efforts, but the GDPR will not be reviewed as a regulation as a whole. I would be surprised if it was at the end of the day. I would hope so. At least the access to data and the personal data definition is way too long and broad. But I have seen a lot of media outlets pushing push notifications saying the GDPR will be reviewed. And then I saw startup people or general people saying, finally, the AI Act will be reviewed, the GDPR will be reviewed, etc., etc. So this is not a good trend, neither on a European level or a member state level. So this is a challenge that is coming for both policymakers, policy advocates, and citizens together. And I have no answer how to solve it.
But I think, we have to adapt to the fact that it's the generations change, not only among advocates or among media or among the general public, but also among policymakers too. I'm seeing now some more MEPs and some more younger politicians that are fully becoming influencers online, like using social media, using TikTok to communicate. Now in the Trump's press room, there is half of the people who are from TikTok media, so more or less. Policymakers are inviting influencers to participate in the policy-making process. So I feel like everything is becoming so interconnected, and we do have to accept the fact that politics is everywhere in a way. And so it's just going to take more education to people to come back to critical thinking. And I feel like AI is sort of, first of all, it went on the peak and kind of killed people's ability to critically analyze information. But then as more people will be in need and hunger for actually human-generated content and for the human news. And I do believe that as books, the legacy media will come back eventually. So hopefully it's just like the spike that we have to overcome. But maybe it's my wishful thinking.
I think I have, I will not reference it directly, but I think a lot of Eastern cultures are very contextual. Our parents, grandparents are the best at it because they lived in environments where one thing was said publicly, but it meant a completely different thing in practice. So they have this natural muscle of reading in between the lines and not trusting the information when it comes out and triple checking, etc., etc. We still do have elements of that in our generation and probably in your generation as well. But that's a big challenge, and that's where society really needs to move towards. Because policymakers also, when they present their own idea, they want to present it in the best way possible in order to receive the least amount of negative comments, etc., etc. And reviewing GDPR on a headline doesn't mean the same as it does in the working group or the working document that is being presented. So contextualized in between the lines, thinking, informational resilience is a big challenge that we certainly need to invest in. I don't want to go into we need to change our education topic because we'll take another 3 hours to discuss this, but that's where it needs to be happening along with families.
And that's a very interesting point. And also, Julia, coming back to your point about the legacy of media being saved, it is either or, because I also have a concern that it can just evolve in a way and transform, because indeed we have a very short span of attention. And the question is whether there would be the same demand for the traditional media, because even if to look at the new generation, they are not searching information in the way how previous generations were approaching that. They are not addressing the newspapers in the search of their answers. And most of them are not even addressing Google anymore. They are searching this information either on AI tools, or they are addressing platforms as TikTok, which is also being fully user-generated. And then I think that both advocates and also policymakers, because for them it is a separate kind of challenge, they all need to learn how to interact with that. And what also I sometimes am thinking about, and this is something that I was recently discussing with a colleague of mine who is working in media, is that maybe in the future there will be a demand for so-called boutique services where everything is being created manually and only through the power of human intelligence, without being reviewed, rewritten, and polished by the AI, because this is also the potential outcome.
This is a great idea. I mean, as Europeans, who most of us speak in Euro English, we still need AI to brush up our grammar once in a while, which is a good thing. But when it comes to deep research and trusting the LLMs, I'm completely with you. Another problem that I see, if I have time to briefly talk about this, is that the best media for example, digital policy is usually paywalled, which means it's inaccessible for the general public. The financial models of media need to be rethought. There has recently been a scandal in Brussels about different media outlets talking about funding received or non-received from the European Commission, and what does it mean to be an independent media, and whether you can be an independent, an editorially independent media outlet or a blog or whatever if you receive funding from somewhere. So big questions ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, there are always lots of challenges for the media. This is something that I've been discussing in the last few days with colleagues from European Journalism Institute, and there were pretty many scandals like that also in Romania and media that my colleagues are working in, because whether then you are kind of lobbying interest of someone who is paying you money, and what are the editorial internal policies, because it also depends on that, majorly depends. However, I see that we are talking, and as much as I really love that, I think that soon we will have to open the floor to our participants. But before that, Egle, I would like you to share some professional advice to young digital policy or generally advocates today. So what would it be based upon your professional experience?
Well, I've already said that if you're just starting, be yourself and focus and emphasize and grow your individual strengths and skills that others might not have. But another thing that I would really hope for Europeans, I also work with American colleagues, and the biggest difference I see between us as Europeans and them as Americans is us being very thoughtful, but sometimes overcomplicating things and not being brave enough. The world is big. There are an abundance of opportunities. There are so many things that can be done. However, we are limiting ourselves by overthinking things, thinking about the bad decisions, etc., bad things that could happen, limitations, suffering from and freezing ourselves in analysis paralysis. So my wish would be, and my advice would be to be more brave in things that you're doing. It sounds very simple. A lot of people have talked about it, but I increasingly think that it's an important quality to have in order to be globally competitive. If we want to be globally competitive, we have to act the way the globally competitive people are acting. There are no room for reinventing the wheel. Europe has had a great civilizational, cultural influence on other parts of the world. However, in this knowledge economy, if you allow me to use this outdated form, you have to be really agile, really fast, really hungry, moving forward, doing things before you think you're ready.
I love this so much. I was actually, for many years, I was under the impression that if you want anything to be done, you have to do it in the US. And because of the room for innovation, as US has these hubs for different industries, for policy making, for tech and innovation, for filmmaking, for country music, whatever, you name it. Latino, it's like the entire US is the hubs for all these many different things. But I feel like lately it's been changing, and I do believe that I understand that in Europe there is a lot of regulatory blocks, that there is a lot of red tape, that there is a lot of, as you're saying, analysis paralysis and overthinking and underselling yourself and undervaluing yourself. But I'm still noticing that there is still a lot of room in Europe, at least, to get started. And I think that kind of political communication is also one of those places, and policy making and advocacy, because as the events in the past 6 months, couple of years have shown, Europe is starting to change a lot, and I really hope that there is also room to innovate how we do policy making process, and hopefully, there will be less gap between Brussels and the rest of Europe, hopefully.
I agree.
We have a question from Pavel.
Yes, I already read it. It's a $1 billion question.
Let's read it out first. How to formulate economic openness arguments in the context of Trump European digital sovereignty discussions?
Oh, it's a very difficult question because if we look at the current economic and trade framework, free trade and economic openness arguments and opportunities are limited. However, as Europeans, I think we are very often moving from one hyperbole to another. One hyperbole is Europeans can do nothing, and the other hyperbole is we have to only buy Europeans and push out American tech and innovations. So it really boils down to having a middle ground, in my opinion, seeing what is accessible and achievable in both a short and long term. Seeing the difference between investing in European competitiveness and economic romanticism that has been fueled by some interest groups, probably. So I would really search for the middle ground, and I think the middle ground argument is also clicking with many groups that have differing opinions, whether it be public procurement, cloud, social media, other services that Europeans rely on currently.
I feel like, Pavel, also, if you want to kind of ask more, you can also unmute yourself and,
Yes, please. If I haven't answered the question, I mean, it's a €1 billion question, but I'm happy to discuss it.
Thank you very much for the floor, and thank you for answering the question. I think I agree that it's a $1 billion question. Maybe I have a couple of follow-up questions because I think this question in particular is super pertinent for CE countries since we are a bunch of open export-oriented economies, and now we are kind of stuck in the middle of all the debates. So I was wondering, given also your political experience, what might be the reasonable position of CE countries within these debates of either, let's say, let's only buy and procure European and European cloud and European, I don't know, AI and so on, or let's just only rely on US tech because it has served us quite well in digital transformation of our economies or public services.
I think for policymakers, thank you for the question. It's a really important one. For policymakers or decision makers, it's very important to talk to practitioners, people on the ground, the ones who are implementing these digital solutions within respective agencies, institutions, whatever. How much would it cost to add another layer of this? How much would it cost to change the contracts? How much would it take to combine all these different services and losing the economy of scale that many countries have managed to achieve? Central Eastern European countries have always had a balanced position, and I think it's a smart position where the European solutions are possible. We should not be blocking the way for them. However, we also have to stay very practical and know that buy European will not mean buy Central Eastern European. And even though we would love to see our Western counterparts, especially Germany, because they have troops in Lithuania now, to succeed in their economic affairs, because we're also dependent on them, there has to be a middle ground based on data and feedback from practitioners who know better than any policymaker anywhere what does it take to create a functioning architecture of a multi-cloud from different organizations? And even though we have solutions that are pushing towards interoperability, that prevent vendor lock-ins, etc., that we will need a lot of time for this to actually start working. So.
Yeah, I also appreciate when decision makers and their teams are going on those field trips and they are actually proactively looking for the best in their fields to find the best products. I mean, I've seen this with some on the more military tech side, but this is really what's important is not only to have, kind of protectionist buy European, but buy what's going to bring you the best value. And this is what's really important is for them to also learn from all those who are doing it very well and build collaborations and partnerships to be able to create in Europe and to create in other countries something of value too.
I very much agree. And there are a lot of heated debates targeted towards tech innovators from the US. We also have to recognize that their size and power is so big and important globally that they have to be treated as individual single entities at times. The US, no matter how we like or dislike the current policies, is not China. Even though the companies are based there and they are somewhat dependent on the administration's actions, but the same thing is happening everywhere, and we should not treat our allies, I'm still using this term, the same way we're treating companies from countries where we really don't have any idea or on where our data is being used, on what the framework of cooperation between the government and the companies are, how dependent they are. I'm leaving a lot here in between the lines, but that's my take.
100%. Also, I got a message from Luca who wants to ask a question but said he's driving. So Luca, if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to do so. My /colleague, B&K Agency.
Can I go ahead with a question, actually? Sorry, my connection dropped.
No, you said you had a question. You wrote in the
Yeah, actually, I have a comment and a question. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Egle, for this. My comment is on the legacy media. They're actually not wrong. You made the example of GDPR or AI Act. They're not wrong. There is a revision which is mandatory of the AI Act, of the GDPR. So that is happening. Is the reader that is not able to understand the context because they stop at the headline, but that I think is more an educational problem actually, more than actually a media problem. Media has always been like this. Now it's clickbait. In the past was very large titles put on the side of the news shops, but it's always been this. So I don't think it's the media. Maybe media became more based, and there is a problem of funding, which has always been in the history. It's always been from the coming from Italy. I can say we had very strong USSR connected newspaper, and we had very strong pro-American newspaper. And nowadays we have the same. We have pro-China and pro-American newspaper getting money from US or China. So I think it's something that always happened in the story. Probably now what is happening is that the social media are amplifying this effect. But since we live in a democracy, I think it's also what is nice. But that was my comment. When it comes to the question, actually, I'm curious to understand how do you envision. You spoke very well for a Brussels bubble. But how do you envision this to be sold to the common people on the street? Because they don't care, especially in you mentioned a couple of times southern and eastern Europe. Now, Eastern European probably cares much more about Europe as a continent per se, because you believe it's more freedom. Southern European, Italian, Spanish, Maltese, Greek, really don't care. I mean, if you look at the turnaround at the European election last time, in Italy it was 31% or 32%. In Spain was 28%. In Greece it was less than, I mean, Greece is also mandatory and was still less than 60%. So I'm wondering, how can we transform everything that we talk today, which makes a lot of sense for all of us, past my term, a policy geek, but probably on the street, you cannot sell this to, as a policymaker, you cannot sell this to a common person because they don't care and they will not vote for you, neither in the national parliament and even less at the European Parliament.
Which, these are great comments and questions. The GDPR wise, I still disagree with you. If you talk to the startup representative and he hears that, or he or she hears that the GDPR will be reviewed, the expectation is that there will be major changes in terms of personal data and access to data. And the current picture doesn't show that this will be happening, except for some cosmetic tweaks when it comes to access to data from foreign companies and so on and so forth, because it has been stated over and over again that protecting personal data is of an utmost importance for the European Union, and unfortunately, GDPR in terms of that is a sacred cow. But you are absolutely right on the rest of the things. And I think it's media's responsibility to translate and look into things that are the most important for the common person, so to say, be it a startup representative or a business owner. When it comes to translating things in an understandable way, I think the biggest niche at the moment lies in explaining what is happening in Brussels piece by piece for both local medias and policymakers, general people, etc. So I don't have a nice silver bullet to present here. How should we explain things? How should we translate it in the best way possible? Because we are all aware how big the number of topics and different initiatives are. However, this is something that has generated pretty good results for me personally, and I see a huge demand for that among people in member states. So it's a long journey. Obviously, people like shortcuts. People like people who think and present themselves as know-it-alls, be it politicians or experts. But it's I don't like shortcuts. I do believe in investing and compound effect of explaining things in an honest and transparent and sort of informative way.
Egle, I feel like the world needs more people like you who are, actually eager to get into very detail and to understand things better. I was having a discussion with one of the colleagues recently, and we were trying to kind of build a plan for some of the activities that we do at B&K, and I was telling to her that no, we actually need to explain in a normal human language what Brussels is doing rather than continuing the same technical, and because it feels like if stakeholders speak to stakeholders, they will use all of the technical language, but then the rest of the European public or global public would be much detached and still cut off from it. So we do need to have still those who are spending a lot of time and effort to understand all the peculiarities of of Brussels and the policymaking process, but we also need them to later on go and translate it all into something that wouldn't be just taken out of context, but would really be understood.
Yeah, I'm not the person who knows how to speak to an old grandmother on the street about the GDPR, I will admit, or the interplay of GDPR, Data Act, Governance Act, etc. And this is too complicated. There are talented people that are able to do that. However, I still see a mismatch between a knowledge asymmetry between Brussels bubble and member state capitals, where even experts, industry representatives, policymakers do not have enough time to invest in following and monitoring these things. And those of us who work with it know that when we are asked, how do you monitor or how do you manage your monitoring system? I don't know what to answer. I begin my morning and end my evening with reviewing various things that I have because I actually like this topic or the subject. So, we have the luxury to focus on these things, and there are people who there is a demand in the member state capitals for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Egle, thank you so much. I know that we ran a little bit out of time with the webinar, but it was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Pavel, for your both comments and questions. And we will put the record of this webinar on YouTube so that it will be available for more people who are interested in the topic. So thank you.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you for everyone who listened. Hope to see some of you soon, either in Brussels or elsewhere. And thank you. Great conversation, really deep. Very usual for conversations with Ukrainian people.
Thank you, Egle. It's always such a pleasure.